Hello and welcome to Dixon Cox, where we go through the week's news in a light-hearted fashion, and the full episodes, as ever, are available on nickdixon.net, as well as loads of other stuff. Although lately I've been very generous and released some things for free, which I did recently with the Rupert Lowe story, which is what we'll be talking about today. We're going to go into it in more detail with Paul Cox, star of GB News, and many other things. How you doing, Paul?
I'm good, thanks, Nick. It's good to be back on Dixon Cox. It's always a good ride.
Yeah. And this week we don't really have this story because I haven't been interested by anything else. I guess the Tesla stocks or something, but I've been so consumed by this story.
Yeah.
I thought I'd just go through it with you because even since my video on it, there's been all kinds of developments. And I'm sure the viewers will know and listeners, but basically Rupert Lowe has been almost ousted by the Reform Party. He hasn't been quite ousted yet. He's had the whip removed and been suspended. But the way that Richard Tice has been talking and Lee Anderson, you realise they basically seem to be kicking him out. They've said Richard Tice implied that it didn't really matter what happens with the investigation, that he'd still be out. That was his strong implication when speaking to Camilla Tominey on GB News. And you go, okay, what's the point of the investigation then? That kind of almost admits to me that it's a witch hunt. That was my take anyway. Rupert Lowe getting loads of support. So the question is, has Farage messed up, or will it really matter to the normal electorate? Is it just an online thing? Paul, what was your overall take?
So, just incredible disappointment from about Friday onwards, really. So the story kind of broke when the whip had been removed on Friday. And the reason there's disappointment is you and I have spoken about reform in different ways from different angles over the last few months, but primarily as the one party that is behaving different from all other parties and willing to talk about subjects that other parties and other MPs are just simply not willing to talk about or even attempt to tackle in any way. And the disappointment comes from the fact that just with one move, which seemed relatively petulant, perhaps from both sides, but certainly in the moment when they removed the whip and the way it was done after the story on Thursday, where Rupert had made comment and, talked about essentially Farage maybe having a bit of a messiah complex. And whilst he's been fantastic in bringing the Reform Party and all other movements that he's led to this point, questioning whether he's the right man to lead it forward. And the reason he's done that is because, as you pointed out, Nick, this goes back to something you were saying maybe 2 or 3 months ago now. Farage seems to be abandoning the initial or original mission, or the mission that most Reform voters thought he was on. And the new CEO came in. What's his name? Yusuf. He came in. Zia Yusuf. And there seems that could just be coincidental entirely, but it seemed to coincide at that point with a much softer Winston Marshall podcast interview where he spoke about downplaying some of the things, almost inevitably. And I think I might be parroting some of the words that you said, actually, because I've listened to a lot of things you've said over this. So forgive me if I am, Nick, but sort of the softening down and the almost accepting that Great Britain will become a Muslim state in some way. I mean, a bit of an over-exaggeration perhaps, but, there's an inevitability about the way the country's going, and, multiculturalism is won to some degree. And obviously being incredibly downplaying on deportations, and that goes against Rupert Lowe. So Rupert Lowe has been the voice of the right of reform, and I think there is two sides to reform. A lot of people who aren't particularly interested in reform or just want to cast them away in some way and be disparaging will call them far right. I think it's been proven a number of times recently that they're not necessarily far right. No less than, as you pointed out today, a Liberal Democrat has defected to reform. Not many far right Liberal Democrats out there, Nick. So there is definitely at least a centre ground within Farage's reform. But Rupert Lowe's been this kind of beacon of light on the right, and he's created quite a platform for himself. And I guess what is interesting, it's very difficult at this stage, and we'll get into the detail, we'll get into the accusation, we'll get into the removing of the whip, and we'll get into the police investigation. Incredibly, the police investigation and the conflicting stories coming out of Rupert Lowe's office, where some of the allegations were aimed. Just really, really, really disappointing behaviour. So my overwhelming feeling is one of disappointment, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that came across in the video I did. I was clearly gutted about it because Rupert Lowe was the guy representing my views on X, and I voted reform. So you go, okay, I voted for things like this, but they're clearly not welcoming reform. And there's this element where people say, oh, you're purity spiraling, and it's all about Farage, and no one cares about Rupert Lowe. And you go, but there has to be a line. And it's like you say, if Farage has abandoned, let me get on to that in a minute. Let me just quickly, just for anyone who doesn't know, say that yes, Rupert Lowe started this. You could argue with his piece with Andrew Pierce in the Mail, where he said, yeah, Farage has this messiah complex. It sort of hinted that, not that exact phrase. They're a protest party. He said he'd have to wait and see if Nigel had what it took to lead. That was the kind of, and that's, of course, that is a problem. It's very hard to say that and get away with it. There is that, but in Rupert Lowe's defense, he had been trying to address this stuff privately for a long time and couldn't get anywhere. So he kind of just, at last resort, went to the press. Now, of course, it's a little bit, for football fans, it is a little bit like when Marcus Rashford said he was ready to move on from United in the media, and you're like, okay, well, he's not going to play for United again, then is he? And he didn't. So when you say things like that, of course, to give the Farage side, you are cruising for a bruising, as we used to say. It's so I do understand that side. However, if he's been pushed to that after months of failed communications and being sidelined and kept out of meetings and press conferences that he didn't know were happening and so on, then perhaps it's inevitable. It's similar to Ben Habib. You go, okay, he keeps talking about how the party needs to be democratized publicly. Of course, it's not going to go well. But again, you realize with Ben, he was trying to talk about it for ages in private. So again, it was a sort of last resort. So but some of Farage loyalists will stay with him and say, no, Rupert Lowe is causing trouble. But I sort of am with you on that point you made about the list of things. I'm with you, even though you got it from me. It's a ridiculous echo chamber of this podcast, which is just, this is an accumulation. So if it was just this, you might go, okay, they didn't get on with Rupert Lowe. Here's one way you could maybe stay with reform. They didn't get on with Rupert Lowe, so they got rid of him, but they didn't do it a dodgy allegation thing. They didn't go for this weird investigation. They didn't make it all public. They just didn't get on with him. Maybe you could stay with him. But it's an accumulation of so many things. To me, it's yes, Farage saying that mass deportations are impossible. That was in the Steve Edgerton interview. And that was strange. Then there was the Winston Marshall interview where he said, Islam's been growing, I think he said 75% every 10 years. And it's just, basically it made it sound like it was inevitable. We just have to capitulate. So it was absolutely insane for a reform person to say that. And I don't think it's even true. He says, if we alienate them, we will lose. We will lose. Now, it's not that you want to alienate people, but this idea we will lose. We talk about demoralizing. Aside from whether that's your political view or not, I like to repeatedly say, if we do that, we will lose. It's like, hang on, mate, I'm not quite prepared to give up just yet. So that was absurd. And then you look at, which many people are looking at now, all the previous times he's done this and fallen out with people, and there's like Godfrey Bloom, or there's who's that guy that appears on GB News, Stephen Wolf. There's a whole list of people. There's Douglas Carswell. There's this whole list of people that Farage has done this with. So that's another thing. So you go, okay, Farage has done this a lot in the past. He's toned down his rhetoric massively on immigration. He's toned down his rhetoric on Islam. He's toned down his rhetoric on just about everything, really. Even Shamima Begum, which seems like the most absolute open goal for a reform party. It's like, hang on, you want to bring back Shamima Begum? Like, what? And you just go, okay, so there's what's left for me to vote for in this party. And then you get rid of Rupert Lowe, who was the one guy that we're like, yes, I like what he's saying. So, but people are like, no, it's Farage, you have to stick with him. You're being too pure about it. It's like, but they're offering literally nothing for me. Yeah. And then you go, would Farage even get these things done? Let's say he did even promise to do all these deportations or something like that. To actually get in and do them is incredibly difficult. You've got the whole civil service against you. It's nigh on impossible. It's something that Dominic Cummings has struggled with. It's almost impossible. So even if he said it, but he's not even promising it. So he's like, no, we're not going to do deportations. We're not really going to do anything you want. And then I'm going to get in, and it's going to be even worse. I mean, so where's your faith that anything's going to happen? And as you say, the relatively breaking news from yesterday, is that this guy, Reg Kane, and it's only a councillor, but it's Lib Dem councillor defects to Reform UK. And I just think it's funny because back last summer, I was saying there's one here from July where I say in reply to Matthew Stadlin, he calls them the hard right. And I just say hard right, lol. Reform are basically the old Lib Dems with a bit more on immigration. And I've had a few tweets like this. And it looks like I was right. There's an element of trolling, but I also meant it. I said in another one, quick guide for any politics fans not living in Britain. This was last October. I said this: Reform are liberal left, Tories are woke left, Labour are woke communists, Greens are woke communists with an electric car, Lib Dems are woke communists on a water slide. Hope this helps. And then I added, and SNP are woke communists who hate England. So those are your choices. I voted Reform anyway on the grounds that, maybe there's like a kind of Trump energy, which maybe if it is going back to liberalism in the 90s, that'd still be better than what we have now. They talk about meritocracy. They don't openly hate white people. They actually just want merit. And it's the only party that isn't like actively anti-white. So you go, okay, maybe I could vote for that, which I did. In my area, it was more like a protest vote in a sense, in that Labour win a crushing victory in my area, and they more than doubled the Tories and Reform put together. But you go, in the language of Westminster, Reform means the right. It means dissatisfaction with the status quo. So in a way, you can sort of communicate with your very small voice a kind of language of like, well, I'm voting for them because fuck you, basically. So there's an element of that. So, but now without Rupert Lowe, I go, what is there left? And the way they've treated him, the fact that he represents my views and the way they've treated him, he actually follows me on Twitter as well, obviously as a solid bloke. You go, what is there left? And if they get rid of Rupert Lowe, I said that's the line where I would not vote for them anymore. What do you think?
Well, there's no way back for Rupert Lowe to the Farage party. They're on a Freudian slip, rather.
Basically.
But it is, isn't it? It is. We'll get onto that. But it is the Farage party, and unfortunately, for Reform to grow, it can't be. I'll get back to that in a sec. It just can't be. There's no way back for Rupert Lowe because he's been reported to the police. This is a very small party. Once he's been, it's a bit like you and I carrying on every week after I reported you to the police for something you said to me on this podcast. It would make it would be untenable.
Or like having to work with someone when they've reported you to HR. That's a tough one. Imagine that.
I can only imagine. I'm sure you can only imagine that too, Nick.
I can only imagine.
But exactly that. It makes it entirely untenable, particularly when it's such a public spat. All of this has been in the open. It could quite easily have been internal. Now, there is an argument that it's just boiled and boiled and boiled, and then it boiled over last week. And now it's really, really boiling over. I'm not sure there's any water left. So there's no way back for Rupert Lowe. He can't. How can he go into Reform? I mean, essentially that would require a full apology from Nigel Farage. That's the only way back now, isn't it? For Rupert back into Reform. So what does that mean for Rupert Lowe? Well, perhaps we'll get onto that. Ben Habib has always been an interesting character to me because he looked like a very strong Reform member. Obviously, he was never an MP. He was the deputy leader, I think, at one point, and he always spoke incredibly well and was very positive about Farage and Reform. Of course, that's subsequently changed considerably. And there were times there that it was just Ben Habib's, or at least it felt to me, Ben Habib's voice versus, the weight of the Reform Party. But since this, it's starting to reveal that perhaps Ben Habib had some points. And some of the things that he said about Nigel Farage may well have been true. He is this messiah. And, how can he seems to, what Nigel Farage seems to be doing is taking the party in a direction which he believes wins a general election. But he is obviously being advised that the only way to do that is to align as much as possible with the Uni Party. Now, there is no point in British politics whatsoever if the only outsider joins the inside group. If they do that, then you might as well just roll a dice for your favourite colour. Or pick it out a tombola machine. Oh, I vote Lib Dem now. There's no other point because you will get different flavours of the same excrement. That's all you'll end up with. So the reason that we're all disappointed is because Reform were offering change, And what Nigel Farage seems to be doing, and I see no evidence to the contrary, seems to be trying to align. And he's softening his message and he's trying to become a more established leader within the British political establishment. And he's clearly being advised. I mean, he's a shrewd man. So it does make you question, I mean, who am I to advise? Who are you to advise? Probably better than I am, to be fair, Nick. But who are we collectively to advise Nigel Farage? He's won his battles, but this is much bigger. And when we talk about Trump and MAGA, what Trump never did is he never tried to coalesce around another movement or try to align himself with something as a way in through the back door. He just created MAGA. And he created MAGA in a way that changed the Republican Party. The Republican Party wasn't aligned to MAGA. Trump is MAGA, and Trump became the leader of the Republican Party and then the president of the United States of America twice. So Farage isn't emulating, on that front at least, in terms of strategy. He's not emulating Trump in any way, shape, or form. Now, Trump would quite easily dispose of someone like Rupert Lowe if he thought that he was treading on his toes in any way. Absolutely, but I don't think Farage is far enough along the line. It's a very, very small party. It's growing itself through councillors. It's growing itself through local authorities, and that's how it's going to build its reputation. But make no mistake, I actually said when we had this discussion, because I've always lent towards the idea that Farage would need to come slightly towards the centre ground because there was a game to be played. I never dreamt that it would be quite to this extent. And there was always potentially going to be, and I've said this myself, bumps in the road. They would pick up scrapes and grazes and cuts and bruises along the way. I didn't envisage this sort of civil war, this really uncivil civil war that's taking place within the Reform Party, really quite publicly, to the point that now Rupert Lowe's got the upper hand, it feels like, because he's the one coming out with the accusations are being made against him. And he's the one who's able to present this rebuttal every single time. Well, this is news to me, or here's some evidence that would suggest it didn't. And here's some conflicting ideas. So it feels to me like Rupert, whilst he's on the outside of the party and won't be back in terms of the disagreement, so publicly, he seems to be on the front foot. I'm not too sure how Farage is going to turn this around, because if he alienates enough voters through this, then what's to stop Rupert Lowe creating what Nigel Farage has done? Now, I don't know if that's possible. And let's not forget that Nigel Farage is a wily old fox that's been at this 30-odd years. And Rupert Lowe's only been a politician, for a year, not even that. And only been in politics for not much longer. So I'm not sure if he is capable. But one thing we have seen is he knows how to build an audience. And he knows how to excite that audience and get them on board. If he was to collaborate in some way with, I don't know, you said Dominic Cummings. I don't know how true that would be. But all that would do is just split. I mean, what we end up with is just a problem on the right of politics that isn't going to fix the problem that we were hoping the right would fix, which is all of the problems that we currently have under Labour, and much thanks to the Tories previously, Nick.
Yeah, well, just on one aspect, there's so much you've said there, but the accusations Rupert Lowe put out today as we record this statement from his team, and it's just all people saying that we want to state unequivocally Rupert is a good, decent and honest man. It's all been signed by his whole team, and I'm sure it's sincere. So I just said going after Rupert is looking like the worst mistake since those guys killed John Wick's dog. I mean, it's just kind of what you're saying. It's like they've gone after Rupert, but they've gone after him in a social media age where he has a massive following and his tweets get huge engagement, and he's backed by Musk, of course, and many people saying that's what perhaps got him into this trouble when Musk said Farage is not cut out to lead, and said what he'd seen of Rupert Lowe was good, and that was always going to cause some problems. But you can't get rid of him because he does so well on X. Some other things you said there. Trump took over. Trump, remember, of course, was not a career politician. Kind of what you're saying there is Farage starts to resemble a career politician, been doing it for decades. Rupert Lowe seems more Trump-esque because he's come from business. He was the chairman of Southampton FC. He ran care homes before that. And he's become a multimillionaire in business. So you go completely different type. Farage was in the city a long time ago, but he's become a career politician, you feel like. Very big difference. as you say, it's a small party already having a civil war with 5 MPs and kicking out 20% of their MPs. But what's fascinating to me is how much support they've garnered from this relatively small nascent party. But that just shows to me there's a massive open goal, which is the fact that the progressive Liberal elite are completely out of touch with the country and are collapsing in every way. So for me, that's actually encouraging that it doesn't have to be reformed, because you could look at that and say, yes, it's because of Nigel Farage's genius. And of course, Farage, I'm certainly not criticizing him. We are colleagues at GB. As a broadcaster, he's excellent. As a communicator, he's very impressive. As a campaigner, he's incredibly impressive. We all know this. This is criticizing him in this political role as leader of reform. So I'm not convinced that it has to be reform. Some would say it's all due to Farage's ability. Ben Habib would say, well, no, we're already in line for similar results to those we got at the election, so it was already predictable without Farage back on board. And you'd say if a new party can just pop up and not be completely terrible and do this well, to me that suggests there is a lot of potential there for another party to take it over. But what would that look like? I mean, one problem, yes, is that Farage has the complete recognition and name recognition. If you, as I said in my video, went onto the street and spoke to the average youth, they may well have heard of Farage, but they won't have heard of Rupert Lowe or
No.
virtually anyone else. So that is a big deal, and it's hard to achieve that. But there is potential beyond Farage, I think. I mean, Ben Habib saying we should do a new party with him and Rupert Lowe. Some people say, well, that's just splitting the right more, even if reform are even on the right, which I question. Then there's a sort of hint that he's been offered to go to the Tories, and Chris Philp has publicly said that he's being treated terribly, which is quite smart. And someone else behind the scenes, has maybe also Philp, I don't know, has said he could join the Tories. That seems quite possible to me. Rupert Lowe goes into the Tories. He was a Tory years ago. Seems quite possible to me. What do you think will be the next move? And by the way, just quickly on Ben Habib, just while I remember, Rupert Lowe also said in the Dan Wootton interview, Ben could have stood out east with him and done better, but he wanted to stay out of loyalty in Wellingborough, and then he lost. So he wasn't trying to play the game of a safe seat. So you could argue that, because
Honourable.
he has some, he has some principles. What do you think happens next for Rupert Lowe then? As you say, I mean, even in Dan Wootton's interview, he says, yeah, there's no way back. Lots of people saying, oh, can they patch it up? But it's been obvious to me since the start they couldn't patch it up. In Lee Anderson's statement, he says that, reform can't function with Rupert Lowe as part of it. So you go, okay, he's just already basically kicking him out, unless it means temporarily, but it sounded like it meant permanently. Richard Tice in the GB News interview, giving the game away, Camilla Tomley saying, well, if he was innocent, would he come back in? He goes, he's had the whip removed, and that should answer that. He goes, he's had the whip removed. Basically saying no. So what's the point? That's what I really hate, is the investigation's an obvious witch hunt, and they're just admitting it. And maybe we'll get on to Zia Yusuf in a minute, but what do you think's next for Rupert Lowe? What will his next move be?
So, I mean, it's unclear, isn't it? He's going to stand. Does he become an independent first, and then somebody picks him up? What is clear is it's a win for all other parties. It is a win to some degree for the Tories. It takes the flack off them because, we saw it almost immediately in the polls as well. This is before Friday. But we saw, Starmer's, I'm not going to go over this again, but Starmer's reaction to Trump's reaction to Ukraine had gained him an extra couple of points, and the sort of rumblings that were going on internally within the Reform Party had seen them lose a couple of points. So Labour are winning in the polls again. It's just a poll, and it's great to see Reform so high up still as such a small party. The Tories get the flack taken off of them because they're a terrible opposition. And perhaps Rupert Lowe does join the Tories. I don't think he is a Tory. I mean, he is. He looks like one, and he's an old-fashioned Tory type. But he really was trying to represent what everybody thought Reform were trying to represent, and that's not the Conservative Party. That's anti-progressivism in almost all senses. He supported deportations. I've never heard many Tories come out and say that. I just don't see where he goes next. Actually, it's such a good question. As you were saying, I was thinking I don't have a pre-prepared answer for a lot of things, but I didn't have a pre-prepared answer for that, because it's like, where does he go next? It's really unclear at the moment. This whole game is being played out, and he's had the whip removed, and there are plenty of MPs out there who had whips removed, and then they've been reinstated once the investigation has taken place and they've been cleared. But it's usually, and Nigel Farage is hiding behind this, by the way. Usually it's all about due diligence. It's going, look, there's been an accusation, and basically we're going to hold an investigation, but we stand by Rupert in the hope that the investigation finds out what we all already believe, and then we'll just carry on as normal. Now, this has been brought about specifically by Nigel Farage and I assume Lee Anderson and whoever else has stood behind him, because they just don't want him out anymore. He said on GB News just recently, Nigel, that this has been an ongoing problem. We've been trying to put it to the back of our minds. We've all been trying to get on with the mission. This has been an ongoing problem, and it's just got to the point where it can no longer be ignored. It's not clear, really, what's meant by that, and it's not clear, really, what any of the accusations are, because they all sort of, weave around a bit, a few Weasley words in there. No real sort of concrete evidence of anything in there. And, of course, with Lee Anderson's team coming out today and saying they've never seen anything like this. And one person in there's been working for him for 30 years. I saw someone who was at Southampton Football Club, not my team of choice. Can't understand why it's anyone's team of choice. But had said this would be entirely out of character for Rupert Lowe. This is somebody who sat at the top of a Premier League club for seasons, an awful Premier League club that would have been under pressure all the time. So
we're getting the Portsmouth view here. Everyone just
you are getting the Portsmouth view here. It's really
before everyone comments. Before the
because you wonder what I'm talking about.
Did you not even have a grudging respect for Matt Le Tissier?
Yeah, he was a great player.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no two ways about it.
Because when he scored against United, even I would go, okay, fair play, that's a good goal.
Yeah, Pompey and Southampton never got to play against each other much in the Le Tissier era, if at all. Maybe a cup game. And then Pompey would have got trounced, I'm sure. So never got to really see Matt Le Tissier play in live. But obviously he scored some tremendous goals, and a great player. So, yeah, I'll give,
maybe that's the new party, Rupert Lowe and Le Tissier.
Well,
they're both Southampton guys.
Le Tissier is quite political now and has been ostracised by a lot of people. Not quite Southampton, because he is a messiah at Southampton, but I'm sure there are people within there that have been slightly embarrassed by his views on the pandemic and the vaccine, etc. And not rightly, by the way, embarrassed, because, Matt was one of these figures that's come out and spoke about it. But I know some fans that don't like what he said, but you can't take his goals away. So you have to eat it. But what happens to Rupert next is, for me, one thing's clear: he leaves Reform. Where he goes, whether he stands independently or not, what use is he on his own? That's the point. And what party supports his views?
Well, there's a lot of use to his constituency who all say he's been great. The only thing anyone said against him was he's not from here, but he's actually been great for the area. Everyone says he's been great for the area. The original statement, as you say, was so weak when they said evidence was provided to us of workplace bullying, the targeting of female staff who raised concerns, blah, blah, blah. But it all turned out to be in the offices, as it said in the first paragraph, the offices. And some people were saying, well, that means that Gawain Towler guy was saying, well, you've all just misread it. They said in the offices, but no, it seems to have been a deliberate sort of ambiguity from Reform. I mean, why even make the statement? Like you say, it's very different from a normal due diligence investigation. Normally, it's like, we've been attacked with something. We have to defend ourselves against the media and public opinion, so we have to go through some sort of investigation. This seems to be the complete opposite. No one was thinking about this, and they made this public with very suspicious timing. And Farage has since come out and said, he said this on February 29th, and it's like, that's a date that doesn't even exist. So that's not helped them. And then there was this accusation of dementia, which was really bad. I mean, if true, is horrific. So Rupert was saying that he'd been told that senior Reform people are briefing the media that he has dementia. It was completely made up. He says, I've been informed. Oh, really? Oh, this is when you right, I'm never voting for these people again. I've been informed by a reliable source that senior Reform figures, in quotes, have been briefing journalists that I have dementia. In politics, there is rough and tumble. I get that. But this is sick. What they're doing to me is disgusting. Absolutely. And so it's so shocking. I mean, that is the absolute line for me, if that's true. And if he says he's been told by a reliable source. So it's dirty tricks on a new level against. Well, I don't understand why they don't realize, maybe they do and they don't care, when you attack Rupert Lowe, you attack so many people who feel represented by him. But
Yeah.
they don't seem to care about that because again and again they've alienated anyone vaguely common sense in the country. They've said we don't want anything to do with that lot. We've said, which didn't. It's one thing to not want to have something to do with Tommy Robinson, but what about all the people that just think, well, he just was good on the rape gangs and so on? They've been very cavalier about alienating anyone to the right and cozying up to this alleged centre, which doesn't exist. So when you do this to Rupert Lowe, you do this to all his supporters.
If it's in any way proved that accusations against Rupert Lowe were fabricated, which will in turn prove that Nigel Farage has a very fragile ego, I think it destroys the movement, let alone Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe. I think it destroys the movement because the movement is under, the movement's in the crosshairs the whole time. This is very much anti-norm. This is very much anti-uni party. This is not where, some of the most powerful people in this country want the country to go. So this is playing right into their hands, again, why it's so disappointing. But if it turns out that what Nigel Farage has done is just had his ego bruised too much by the fact that Rupert Lowe has been very successful in getting his point across and building an audience and garnering a lot of support in what Nigel will consider his party, and rightly so. I don't think anyone disagrees that Reform is Nigel Farage's party. Rupert Lowe comes along and sort of challenges the king slightly.
Well, Ben Habib would certainly deny it. He says, all these people have done this work. Farage only came back on board quite latterly. So people do challenge that. And notice Farage said in his Telegraph piece, something, my party. And Rupert Lowe was like, hang on, it's our party, Nigel. So, Farage did come back and do his statement in the Telegraph about it, saying we don't need him fighting. Rupert Lowe's done some good things, but it's very hard to build a party bar. I mean, yes. I mean, well, we're never going to resolve it. I mean, there's going to be the people who are just going to be pure Team Farage, defend him no matter what. And, even I was still sort of on board with Reform, even after the Ben thing, because you go, well, Ben Habib didn't have a seat, to be fair. Maybe he has said too many things. Even though I like him and had him on my podcast, it's like maybe he said so many things that's become untenable. But there must be a line. And for me, this is the line. For other people, they won't even know about this. They'll just carry on. Go on.
Interestingly, my jury's out slightly on whether this continues to be an absolutely huge story. In terms of localized and in the area of politics in which we indulge, it's massive. It's the biggest story of the time and probably will, roll out throughout the year to some extent. In the grander political piece, it might not be. And the only way it might not be is if Reform go from strength to strength in the polls. But I'm not quite sure how they're going to do that, because I think some of that was down to Rupert. Some of that was down to Rupert Lowe. And, I'm not taking anything away from anybody else. And, I'm trying not to be entirely anti anyone here, because obviously I don't know what went on behind the scenes. But quite clearly, some of the accusations, I'd be surprised if some of those accusations are true. There doesn't seem to be any real evidence. This whole team coming out and saying, well, it hasn't happened here. And that's the team within his office. And like they said within their statement, if there was such a big concern, why were we not warned? If you had this ogre who's going around bullying people and being, violent towards people, why would his team not have been made aware? Guys, have you seen anything? Has this happened to you? So, and the fact they've all been willing to put their name to that is interesting. Without Rupert asking them to, it would so appear. So, I'm trying not to say that I know, because I don't know. But if it turns, like I've just said, if it turns out that it's fabricated anyway, it's a massive issue. If they're able to get through this, and I don't believe Rupert Lowe will stay with the party, maybe Rupert Lowe gets lost in the noise. Maybe we all remember him fondly and we just carry on. It's definitely possible within politics. Mm-hmm. No one's bigger than politics. We've seen it all. We've seen all the characters come and go. Thatcher, yep. Churchill, Johnson, Blair, Brown. Just thought I'd chuck him in there. But
absolutely.
These are all massive characters that, where are they now?
Yeah, we have a bias to it because it's happening right now, but I absolutely think you're right. I could easily see it fading, and this is what bothers me. I could easily see it fading. Farage dispenses with another person like he has so many times, and people just move on. That could very easily happen. By the way, that quote was was reformers Nigel Farage in the Telegraph. Reformers acted responsibly over Rupert Lowe. The stakes are too high. My party has elections to win. Then again, the Economist doesn't normally write doesn't write the headline and the subheading, so you could argue he didn't write that. But the whole tone has been bad. And there was a piece in the Telegraph today that was pretty weak, to be honest. It was Musk considers backing Rupert Lowe if he forms new party after reform row. You look into it though, and it's Elon Musk would consider backing Rupert Lowe if he formed an alternative party. It has been reported, and you go where? And I couldn't find. You
Yeah.
read the article. There's nothing. It's in the Financial Times. According to the Financial Times, Mr. Musk has now indicated that he would support a credible right wing party that offer an alternative to reform. He did not respond to the FT's request for comment. So it's a rumor reported by the Financial Times. The Telegraph are now going. The Financial Times has reported this. Thus, it sounds like a story, but I don't think. And the FT's paywall there, so I can't actually check the original. But from what I heard, that it was pretty weak, even the piece in the FT. So there's nothing in that, I don't think. But it doesn't mean it's not possible. Of course, he wanted to offer that money to reform at one point, didn't he? So it
He
could
backed
happen.
away.
Well, it got a bit weird, didn't it? But
Yeah.
it got a bit weird. But if it was done in a more sensible way, I don't know, man. Yeah, you're right. It could easily fall apart, this story. It'll fall away from public consciousness, and then Farage just carries on, reform carry on. I still think the problems will remain. I don't think reform are the answer for a number of reasons, really. This is one reason, but there's so many now. You look at the policy positions of Farage, they're probably going to be outflanked by the Tories on immigration. Chris Philp, who I think is a future leadership contender, is talking tough on immigration and social housing today. Kemi Bay not going to last very long. It'll be Philp or Jenrick, I think, and then they could outflank them on immigration, which is shocking. Then the Tories can come back from the dead. You know, it could happen if reform keep ballsing it up. But my concern is that if reform get in anyway, are they really going to be the people that fix it? Cummings laid out that idea where maybe we can solve this in 2029 if you all vote reform in local council elections, and Trump and Musk get on board and sort of bringing this third force, this elite talent, stratum of elite talent underneath the political layer, similar to Silicon Valley in the US. That's sort of one version, but it was sort of a long shot. And the other version, he said, we have to do it. It takes longer and probably with quite a lot of violence happening. So, and if you listen to Professor David Betts, and I recommend his podcast on the New Culture Forum, he talks about civil war and how Britain has many of the signs of it. I just think the problem's not going away. If reform can't solve it, if our main parties refuse to solve it, we'll head towards violence, is what I now think, because the divisions in the country is so great. And what we have now are parties so irresponsibly and crazily creating this two-tier system. We saw the sentencing guidelines. That's another story we could have covered. The sentencing guidelines that call for special treatment for ethnic and faith minorities. So the judges are supposed to look at you're not a white Christian. Okay, well we'll bear that in mind. Like, what the fuck is that? So we're in a two-tier system. We already knew we were in a two-tier system, but it's a next level of institutionalized racism, right?
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. So we're heading towards more and more resentment. Professor Betts points out that we already have these so-called communities where it's like they have to meet. We always talk about our communities, meaning these ghettos where you have to meet with the community leaders and say, we'll do a bit of policing next Thursday if that's all right. Do you mind? Put your weapons down and we'll turn a blind eye. And it's like, okay, that's not a functioning society. This is a pre-violence society. So anyway, I see that's still where we're heading because our parties refuse to solve it. And there's no point. Yeah, it's great for Farage if he finally gets in. His dream, he's done all this hard work. He gets in finally and is accepted by the establishment. As you say, the media may drop this story. They may be incentivized to drop it because that's the narrative they want. And that's great for him, but it doesn't do anything for any of us. It doesn't get anything solved. So that's my concern. What about this? Unless you want to say anything to that, otherwise I'll go on to Zia Yusuf.
No. I mean, I really obviously hope that we don't descend into violence, but it wouldn't be unprecedented. I mean, you don't have to look at some of the riots and protests that went on last year. It's not impossible. It's always simmering. It just takes one incident. Obviously, this isn't the incident that's going to create that. This is pretty small compared to what happened at Southport. But it only takes something, and I don't see. I just don't. I mean, I don't see the Tories being able to deliver the type of policies we would have hoped for from Reform. I just don't see it at all. So we lose Reform now. I think that's lost for another while. It just takes, in order to get to. There was some optimism around Reform. This is again the disappointment. It takes a lot to build the type of optimism that was around Reform, with them leading in the polls, with Tories being a disastrous opposition after being disastrous government, Labour totally incompetent, far right thuggery. I mean, there was just endless problems for Labour, and all of a sudden, the main political story is Reform. So just to sweep that up, it is very, very disappointing.
Yeah, and when I talk about the violence, of course, I always do this thing. I've just watched the podcast and I have to. Then it's just in my head, but I just mean that reform, if someone's going to answer the problems in this country, which are immigration, legal and illegal, the inherent flaws of multiculturalism, which are getting out of control, and within that, probably as a result of immigration, but certainly related to it, the cost of housing, cost of living, any number of issues you can cite. That we all know the whole country's declined massively, and it's getting to a point of great tension. I just mean, who's the party that's going to solve that and represent those people? And if it's not going to be Reform, which I just don't have any faith that it is, because they tell us repeatedly, we're not your guys. They say, we don't care about deportation. They say, we don't care about demographic change. We don't care about any of the things you care about. So that ordinary people across the country care about. So you go, I don't know. You say, what is there left with Reform? So someone else got to do it. But I'm a bit different. People are like, 2029 is our last chance. You're going to put Labour in again. I don't think 2029 is the last chance. I just think it's going to play out, and it's going to maybe take a bit longer than you think. So then maybe things are going to get even worse than you think before it does descend into violence. And violence, by the way, means, if you listen to Professor Betts, and I might be getting carried away, but it means things like taking down the power grid. He thinks it's like a rural versus city battle you end up with, and the parts of the north would take down the power supply to London and things like this. We can get into all that. It's just a whole other podcast. But my point is, I mean, Europe's got much worse and hasn't quite descended into that. But France is pretty bad, isn't it? I just mean, you can't get rid of these tensions. You've created a multicultural society with all these tensions. You brought in 1 million people in a year and so on, and multiple other tensions. They're just some of the key ones, obviously, that lead to the existence of Reform. Those problems will continue to exist, whether Reform want to tackle them or not. Whether Farage wants to tackle them, they'll continue to exist. So maybe Labour do get in 2029, but then something else comes along. Someone else gets their act together. Maybe it's Cummings, or they don't, and it's just pure chaos. But those problems aren't going anywhere, and thus those voters aren't going anywhere. That's the way I see it.
I think it feels like what you're saying is Reform were the pressure release valve, and if that doesn't exist anymore, that the energy and pressure has to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's it. That is pretty much what I'm saying, and that's why some people even call them containment. They could say, is Reform the kind of fake release valve where it's like, oh yeah, we'll deal with your concerns, but they actually don't. But I just don't think that's going to cut it anymore, because that's what was 14 years of the Tories, if not that. It was, oh yeah, we'll do stuff. We just did nothing, made everything worse. So you go, okay, you do nothing. This Potemkin show that Cummings has talked about, how long can politics just carry on being this liberal progressive nonsense Potemkin show where nothing actually gets done that anyone wants? Well, eventually that causes so much tension that something different does happen. And in the US, you could say it happened with Trump. Whether he'll deliver everything is, of course, another question. But in a way, that's what happened with Trump finally, when he finally, in 2024, not even really 2016 Trump, where he was kept out of having real power. What do you think to Zia Yusuf? You hear all these things that he, now at university, he was known as a left-wing Muslim student by his circle. That doesn't particularly matter, because you can have mad views at university. But he sort of appeared from nowhere. Everyone feels he's funded the party, he's chairman. There's all this. You hear all sorts on the internet. We can't necessarily verify about dissatisfaction at the local level with how he's been running things. But it does. I think it is certainly one plausible explanation that Farage has gone down. He's close to Zia Yusuf, not a fan of Rupert Lowe, of Ben Habib. He's gone down this other route, but no one really knows what Zia Yusuf sort of stands for and why he's involved. It's a bit weird. And then in terms of this statement, he's meant to have had this terrible threat from Rupert Lowe in December. No one understands why. Then it's only coming out now. Why is he only made? Why was the complaint made to the police just the other day? Seems very dubious.
And this is where the violent or elements of violence comes from, isn't it? This Zia Yusuf confrontation which took place. And look, I'm sure there's some right old shouting matches that go on in politics behind closed doors.
You're gambling with World War III. Some of them go out in front of the
some of them just do it on the
doors.
Biggest platform they could possibly find, a press conference at the White House. The timing is far too suspicious. I'm really sorry. There might be someone out there who's listening to this who knows all about it, and it might be entirely true, and Rupert Lowe might have been bang out of order. But you kept it under, if that's true, you kept it under wraps for 3-4 months, and then you brought it out as like a jack in the box, as a gotcha for Rupert Lowe when you wanted to. So we're all going to see through that. Whichever side you're on, we're all going to see through that. So I don't know. Zia Yusuf has always seemed quite an impressive and slick operator to me, someone who is very articulate, a great orator whenever he appears on debate shows and panel shows. He gets his point across very well. The reform representatives, when they're on question time, let's say, are always going to be the underdog. The audience are largely going to be against them, both in the in the venue and at home. But he in particular, much like Ben Habib used to be honest, comes across incredibly well. Now, quite clearly, Nigel Farage likes him. He wouldn't put him at the top of his party otherwise, would he? And, Nigel will always consider himself the leader of that party, irrespective of the positions he creates, to try and give the illusion of a democratic political party, which is not quite there yet and is always going to be a problem. And it's manifesting itself in this as well. I'm not sure this would happen at another party. Whether it should or shouldn't is a debate maybe for another day. But it's certainly part and parcel of what Farage has created that's kind of different and unique. But Zia Yusuf seems like, the idea, he's a Muslim guy. So you'd imagine that most Muslim guys wouldn't naturally be Farage advocates, wouldn't naturally be reform voters, because when we talk about when we talk about immigration, illegal immigration in particular, we are largely talking about Muslims and the threat of Islam. And let's not forget, that's a big part of it. We're not saying all Muslims are Islamic terrorists, but, all Islamic terrorists are Muslim. So it's a problem. And he's come across, and obviously that's an advantage in today's arena, political arena. If you are what, let's just take the left and right. If you represent what the left hold high and go, this is what multiculturalism is, and this is why we should be grateful. If someone from that community then defects to some degree and becomes a senior representative on the other side of the argument, it's a lovely bit of political gamesmanship that we see quite a lot of. It's a bit like Greta Thunberg. The only reason Greta Thunberg got to such prominence because she was a young girl. She was a child. They took a child, but you can't really attack a child. If you're a grown man, you're not supposed to attack a child. So it made it very difficult. It's all political brinkmanship, essentially. So it's always interesting when you see that sort of thing happening, particularly on the right of politics. But I don't know anything about him. I don't know anything about him at all. I only know what I've seen. How much do you know, Nick?
Very little. I hear all these rumours, then very rarely good. I listened to his interview with Nick Robinson on that BBC show. He sounded like a kind of Sunak type of guy to me, kind of similar. It seems a similar kind of journey, really. Didn't get. He seemed like a slight, like you say, quite slick. Didn't get that much from him, really. Slick, hard-working guy. My parents maybe do my homework sort of thing. That kind of bit of a Vivek
Sunak.
vibe. Yeah, a bit of a kind of, shut up and do. Someone actually said that all we need to do is get Zia Yusuf to do a tweet about how English people are lazy and don't do any work, and I'll destroy the Vivek angle. It did seem quite similar, but yes, but it's a bit different because like you say, because of course Vivek and Sunak are Hindu, and that is different in the political landscape inevitably. And this is interesting about the accusation. Rupert Lowe is 67. James Harvey puts this tweet up. Rupert Lowe is 67. Mohammed Zia Yusuf, I mean, Zia is sometimes like a nickname for Mohammed, isn't it? Apparently, is 38. Are we really expected to believe Rupert Lowe physically threatened and intimidated Zia? It does seem a bit off, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Rupert Lowe, hard bloke, I'm sure, but it's a bit off. And then quite a good tweet from Schrodinger's borderline normal, who says, deep down, I always knew the battle for England would be between a guy called Rupert and a guy called Mohammed. I mean,
lovely work.
Edgy bants there. It's funny, isn't it? Yeah, because it's funny about we talk about class a lot, maybe more on our other podcast. But Rupert is, as anyone not familiar with England, Rupert just means you're posh. It's absolutely baked in. There's no working
Rupert.
class Rupert. No, it's not even a middle class Rupert. There's only posh Ruperts, and it's just. So it's quite funny in a way that we back a Rupert so strongly, but that's how it kind of is in this country. You often have to find your kind of aristocratic champion, don't you? Because of course, scum like us don't actually do it, but we get to have occasionally a champion of the people, and Rupert Lowe seems to be that. By the way, although I might be a member, I might be a key player in this new party because Ben Habib just followed me with his new account. His other one's been hacked. He's only following like 70 people, so. And Rupert follows me, so maybe I'll be a key player in this new thing. We don't know.
Nick.
Too early to say. Here's a crazy theory for you. Godfrey Bloom, who used to work with Farage, former UKIP MEP, claimed that Farage was totally different since his plane crash. Now, Farage has had all these near-death experiences. He's had a serious illness. Then he had a car crash, and he had that very serious plane crash where the pilot later killed himself. It was so traumatic. So. That must have been horrific, and we've all seen the pictures of it probably. But interestingly, Bloom claims, and it may be if it's not true, it's a very unfair claim, but he claims that he became a different person after that. He became a lot more paranoid and less sort of fun and just more. You can imagine how it might change you, whether physically or mentally or both. You wonder he still has back pain from it. You wonder what it did to him. That, I mean, do you think that's plausible?
Inevitably, it would have impacted him, surely. And, there probably is a personality change after you've, dodged death in that way, particularly when you fall out of the sky. And unfortunately, we got to see the images of him just afterwards, incredibly dishevelled, shocked, and, in a state of disarray, as would anyone. Was very fortunate to survive. So I can quite believe that his personality or some of his character traits were different from that point on. And so what? He won Brexit after that point. The thing to remember with Farage is he's been in a lot of battles. He's won a lot of fights. This isn't the end of Farage, not by any stretch. He's going to go on. He's going to keep pushing, and reform will be the Farage party, and we'll see where it takes it. My hope, actually, because of the grander mission, is that it does carry on being successful. Because I'm not sure anyone else can go from a running start, even if it is Rupert Lowe and a big money backer. I'm not sure how that would work. But stranger things have happened. We shall see.
Yeah, maybe they will change their name to the Farage party, as you said there, versus the low-down party. Get it out. Rupert Lowe's going to have his own name. Just the Rupert versus Nigel parties. I don't know. Who knows, man? It's. I don't know. Let's see. I think we've done more than I thought we were going to do. I thought we wouldn't have enough material, but that's never been a problem for us. Hopefully we didn't just. I don't know, go over the same stuff, but it's
took some different angles, didn't we? Took some trundles down some interesting paths.
Yeah, let us know what you think. I did a Substack video, and it was maybe for Substack, and I put it on YouTube. So I said, let us know what you think. And I thought, that's dangerous because I've now put that on YouTube. But all the
Yeah,
comments have been great. So thank you very much for that. And so now probably we'll just go to over to nickdixon.net. People mock me about the paywall, but we've given you a good chunk there. And we'll just go over and do peak woke for our hardcore fans, and obviously say some racist stuff behind the
yeah,
paywall.
absolutely.
Paul will
I'm
give his
ready.
real views. Completely different person behind the paywall. Uh, you wouldn't even recognize it. Anyway, you want to send people to Paul?
Yeah, you follow me on Substack at Paul Cox Comedy, Twitter, X at Paul Cox Comedy. That's where you can find me, and YouTube at Paul Cox Comedy.
All right, go and follow Paul. But we're going to do this story about the Church of England telling people to avoid Eurocentric prayers to boost inclusion. So look forward to that. But for now, for all the people on YouTube and audio, thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week.